Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Devin Ashby from Backcountry Exposure. Not only is Devin what I would consider a friend of mine, but he is a phenomenal YouTuber. He is a great educator, both on his channel and at a local college. And he's also been a general manager for a gear company. So he's a wealth of knowledge. And in this podcast, we dive into that wealth of knowledge. We cover things such as what it's like to be on the YouTube side of things and then transition into what I'd say kind of coming behind the curtain of a gear company and just the differences and what it takes to design a product and perspective there. We talk about his scariest story on trail where things got the most real for him and lessons learned from that. And we also ended with a few car camping tips, gear tips that I was interested in getting his perspective on. So we covered a lot of different things in this podcast. I think you guys will get a ton of value out of this. So join me as we welcome Devin back onto the podcast. He's been on here a few times and we're excited to have him on once again. Okay. Enjoy this podcast and enjoy this conversation with Devin Ashby. All right, Devin, I'm super excited to have you back on the podcast. You're someone that I try to keep tabs on and communication open with because I would consider you a friend of mine as much as someone that I just love to follow online and to hear what you're thinking. So great to have you back on. How are things going?
Oh, it's good to be back. The last time we did this, we were in the mountains together, right? Was that the last time that we recorded?
Yes. Way better than these four walls I'm confined in right now, right?
I know. I'm trying to think back to what that scene was at the edge of the lake and just enjoy that experience. But no, it's good. Happy to be here and chat and just enjoy the next little bit together.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to dive backwards a little bit, and I don't know if I've ever heard your true origin story of YouTube. And so today I went back and I just looked at your oldest video, right? Your very oldest video.
Oh no.
Which was a hands only, right? Your hands are in the picture and you're talking about this stove, right? It was from 9 years ago, man. Which is kind of crazy, right? I started Outdoor Vitals 9 years ago. So we were really getting into this whole scene maybe around the same time. But would love to just hear what inspired you to even make that video or to make any videos and start putting them up online.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go back. This probably goes back to before I had really sunk my teeth in to what I was doing for college. So I had started as a photography major in college. And then I decided at one point that I'm like, dude, I don't freaking want to work for myself. Yet here I am working for myself now.
Yeah.
But at the time I was 23 years old. I don't want to do this. And so I had a close friend that was like, hey, I'm in this program called Outdoor Recreation Management. And so you love the outdoors. This would be a good opportunity for you to just pursue what you're passionate about, which I know is rock climbing and hiking and fishing. And I'm like, there's a college degree for outdoor recreation. What is this?
Yeah. Right.
So, I then met my wife. We got married. We moved into our first, real place by ourselves. And I had started to really sink my teeth into what I was doing in my degree at the university, which was outdoor recreation management. And I just became obsessed with gear and with hiking. And it's not like it was an overnight obsession. It's something that I've always been passionate about, through my whole childhood. Mm-hmm. But I got to the point where I was like, well, I want to start a blog. And that's when blogs were super popular, and YouTube had not really yet kicked off the way that it is now. And so I started writing because I think my wife was kind of tired of me chatting about gear all the time and like, look at this cool piece of gear, look at this tent, like, look at this sleeping bag and this cool sleeping pad that weighs 12 ounces and like all this fun stuff. And so I started
Right.
writing a blog to like be that creative outlet, you know? And then I had the thought like, well, what if I did some kind of visual aspect to support my written reviews on my blog? And so it feels so cliche to say this because I feel like anybody that starts a YouTube channel says like, I had no intentions of starting a YouTube channel, but that was not, it was supposed to be a companion to my written reviews
Okay.
and not the purpose.
Complimentary
Like I'm
to
going
them.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, complementary to what I was writing so that people could see visually a better
And that wasn't like
representation
a part of
for
your,
scale.
yeah, that wasn't like a part of your degree or anything. That was just something you're like, I have so much passion around this. I just want to share some of the stuff that I'm learning.
Yeah, it was just like a byproduct of me being consumed by that mentality of like, this is what I'm doing. And I'm that kind of personality where when I get stoked about something, I just go all in and I research the crap out of it and just like become consumed by it. And
Mm-hmm.
um, which has been interesting because I've now been doing YouTube for close to 10 years. Like October, I
Right.
think it'll be 10 years, which is
Right.
nuts. And that's not normal behavior for me, to be honest. Like
To like stick
I,
with something like that. Like,
yeah, to stick with something for that long. And
yeah,
so
that's not easy, dude.
that's,
Making videos. Like I have a lot of people even ask us of like, why do you think like your brand makes these videos and does this and like no one else does? And I'm like I've thought about this and my only reason is like, cause it's effing hard, like it's so much time. It's time, it's
yeah.
commitment, it's consistency. And it's like, I've made like thousands of videos between like YouTube ads, stuff like that. And it's like, there's nothing
Mm-hmm.
easy about it, man. I mean, there just really isn't. So to stick with something for 10 years, like you're talking about, and especially in your format, right? Because up until recently, which we'll talk about, this has been something you're doing after hours, man. Like you're doing this on your personal time, of what other people would consider their own personal time, right? So it's a huge commitment and it's a huge, I mean, you should definitely celebrate hitting 10 years of consistency in uploading.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot. I guess I'll say like, as I'm thinking about it, what has made it feel like I can stay consistent and keep doing it is the relationships, like the opportunities that have come from doing it. Because it's not just like, I don't know, from I think the viewer standpoint or the viewer perspective, it's like, oh yeah, he's just posting a new video about gear or a backpacking trip or whatever once a week or maybe multiple times a week. And that's what I'm seeing. But like on my end as a creator, the relationships that have come from reaching out to a company, Outdoor Vitals being a good example, or even like when I was working in the climbing industry, I like had so many friends because Utah's like a mecca for outdoor companies. There's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you're working in the industry, your social circle is pretty small when it comes to like the amount of people that you can connect with that also work in the industry. So like my ability to contact a friend that worked at Black Diamond, for example, just be like, hey, what's the chance I could get a piece of apparel or one of your tents to share on my YouTube channel? So there was like a little bit of that benefit of me having access to
Yeah.
that.
I was going to
But
ask this. I was going to ask this point right here, which is like, you're a gearhead. You love gear. You love comparing it. You love specs on it. Um,
yeah,
you geek out about it, right? And so my question kind of is like, do you love the gear side of the outdoors more than you even love like sometimes the field time of the outdoors. I don't know how to like say that a different way. Like that doesn't sound like, cause I don't mean that in a negative way, but like there's a truth to like the, dude, I do it. So for instance, if I'm under a lot of stress, I will start to daydream about purchases, about like, you know, what if I set up an adventure, like a touring motorcycle, an adventure bike, and I started doing all these huge back road country, you know, loops and camped off the motorcycle, or what if I got a boat and I went through all of Lake Powell on this boat and we camped off the boat and we, you know what I mean? I'll start to like do this as a way of like coping, stress, etc. And other people do it too, right? There's a reason why these YouTube channels exist, have hundreds of thousands of views, you know. So I want to pose that question to you of like, how much of what you do is like because you love being up to date on the product, getting new product, testing, you know, like that side of it versus just like the massive, I don't know, like the disconnect or whatever it is that like calls you specifically to the outdoors?
That's such a good question, because it really is two passions that become one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So scenario one is, I personally really enjoy, even though I would never pursue any kind of like engineering, I think my brain in a way works a little bit like an engineer's brain, where I enjoy the tactical, like not tactical, but like tactile aspect of design, and how a design becomes a functional product. And then that product then creates some kind of performance or opportunity for an experience in the backcountry. And that feels really like, whoa, Devin, getting fancy with gear over here. But it's just like the idea that somebody has an idea to create something, it gets designed in a computer program, and then it actually gets manufactured, and then it does what the person said it would do. And I like that aspect a lot about gear, even though sometimes it's really simple, like a shirt that you put on that like helps keep you dry and cool, or adds a little bit of warmth, or something as technical of a tent that has crazy geometry, things about it that are just like, how do you know how to put that together? Like the math that's involved, the brain power, like that's where I get kind of lost, and I could never be an engineer. But that's the gear side of things that I really like, because I just like that, analyzing that whole process essentially. But then on the flip side, it kind of goes back through like my whole childhood of spending time outside with my parents and my siblings, and going camping with friends, and just having outdoor experiences and enjoying so much like what those memories are, that I want to go create more of those memories. And it's interesting to me that it's kind of like the perfect marriage of the two concepts. And I think that goes with any other thing. Like, you like race cars, you're going to go to the racetrack and watch race cars, but you might also love tinkering on your own car to try to like be part of it in that way.
I would say too that like being able to kind of connect two different passions or hobbies is probably what's kept you consistent too with YouTube and staying a part of this, right? Because anytime you can connect a few different motivations into something, you're just that much more motivated to stick with it for a long time and be consistent. And it's not going away, right? It's like, it's not like this is a part-time job that you picked up to make a little extra cash. It's like, no, this is like who you are, and that's not going to change. You know, if you decided to never post a video again, you would still go outdoors all the time, right? So it's
absolutely.
Like, I think that that is kind of where the magic comes in, and it's what sets you apart, right? As your channel too is coming in with a very technical, logical brain. There's YouTube personalities out there that are much more just entertainers. There's ones out there that are maybe a hybrid. There's, but like definitely on your channel, I know that when I watch a video that you have reviewed and gone through something, I know that you've gone into the technical side of it and you've really compared, you know, the field of what's available out there. You're looking into some of the components. And so, yeah, I think it's just a really cool blend of your passions there. I'm kind of the same way. Like as a kid, you could have picked up, and I'm going to bring up motorcycles twice in one podcast. So, as a kid though, I grew up kind of in a small, almost farming community, and like dirt bikes were like the cool thing, right? Like it was to have a dirt bike was a cool thing. And so like you could pick up like any brochure from like Yamaha or Honda, and I could tell you like the dry weight of every motorcycle and the wet weight of every motorcycle and the suspension travel and the fuel tank size. And, I just love to like piece all this stuff together. And it was really interesting to me. And it's so funny how, I don't know, like I think some people just have that type of, I don't know, mentality in some ways. And even when starting out the company, it's like 10 years ago, I thought I could be a designer. You don't know what you don't know, but it was just one of those where like my mind always worked that way of wanting to piece things together. And anyways, but this leads perfect into the next question I have. Okay. Because you're a YouTuber for years and years. You're getting out all the time. You're viewing all of these products all the time. And then you have this opportunity to go and work for a gear company, and you get to step onto the other side of this this threshold per se. And it's a threshold that I will say this, people that are on one side of it understand this, and people on the other side understand this. I would say that in some ways, maybe I can see both sides a little bit, but just from spending time with both sides. But like, it's so easy from an outside perspective to just be like, why don't you design it this way? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Like constantly like, well, you could have done, like keyboard warriors just like making design suggestions all the time. And then there's the different side of like being in, on the other side of the threshold where it's like, okay, to design that would mean this, and then that takes away from this, and we'd have to source this. Like it gets so crazy. And so I want to kind of hear about your perspective of what it was like to go from like an outside keyboard, I'll call you like a keyboard designer, or someone who's like dreamed about designing, to like putting stuff into production. What do you think people don't know about that?
I think there's just I'm trying to think how to phrase it in a way that like brings it all together, like full circle. Because what I think is unique about my position and where I ended up was not the idea that, oh, I'm a passionate outdoorsman and I have this like technical experience of a lot of different products, and that is the strength that I'm bringing by leaving the climbing industry and then going into a backpack manufacturer. It was the desire to leave what I was doing in my position at the climbing gym as a manager to bring management experience to the company that I was working for. And it just so happened that I also have like that technical brain in the experience of like reviewing and having used a bunch of products. So it was like a little bit of a unicorn situation where I had even started my own gear company back in 2018. I was designing gear. I taught myself how to sew. So there was like all of these little things that like my hands were in that brought like, okay, this is a small cottage gear company. So I'm bringing experience in all levels. But the primary factor was like, I had been a general manager managing employees in a business successfully for 8 years. I'm bringing that experience into helping manage this growing cottage company.
Yeah, I mean, for them, it was like it is a unicorn situation where I mean, you had your hands in so many parts of the business there, right? From customer service to shipping to marketing to
Design,
production management to sewing, like all these things, right? Like you were,
R&D,
and that's what startups need, right? They need someone who can do it all, right? Like that is the most valuable person you could ever have in a startup, right? But yeah, I'm curious again, and I actually kind of skipped over the fact that you had, been sewing some of your own product and designing some of your own product as well. So I guess I'm just curious what your thoughts are on like what everyone over here that is buying, consumers versus designers, and what gap you think there is there that would be interesting for people to like understand more fully, because I feel like there is just a gap there that people, they don't understand. Again, you see those comments like, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do this?
Yeah. And I skirted around your question a little bit to try to bring some context, but
yeah,
I think that what the consumer doesn't like fully grasp is the amount of work that actually goes into the design of a product. And I think it's really easy, especially like in the cottage industry, when you don't have these massive MOQs for like minimum order quantities. People that don't know what MOQ means.
I wouldn't have even caught that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but just like
daily vocab.
When a company is a very large brand and they're obviously not producing in-house versus like a small company that is, I think it's easy for a consumer to be like, well, you're making this by hand anyway, just add a couple of these loops to this or add this to the product and it'll be fine. Like it's none the wiser, right? But what I think it's missed in the understanding aspect is, well, if you add that loop that hasn't been strength tested, that hasn't been field tested to see how it actually functions, and you're almost like, you can't just on a whim make changes like that when you're trying to scale and grow a company, because what if it fails? What if it has this like catastrophic issue and you're out on a thru hike, or you're like super remote in the wilderness and now the gear that you have to rely on is not now functioning. It's like totally messed up. And it may have been because of like one little change that was made to the product. And so that's where I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect of, there's a lot of research that goes into how something is designed, how it's produced. And in some instances, sure, yeah, you can get away with like quick changes or like not field testing something, but you're running on thin lines when you do stuff like that. So I don't know if that's my perspective, but I know that you can go into way greater detail on that question, but
yeah. And I think we've covered it a bit on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll cover it again, but I just kind of wanted to get your perspective, because you were kind of in some ways the outsider that stepped in and, kind of saw this different lens, this different perspective, more in like a flash versus for me, it's been, gradually year over year, type of,
And I think the only thing else that I would add is like the consumer might see, well, this company is doing this, and why can't you also do this? I'll use the trampoline style back panel of a backpack.
Yeah.
The number of times that I've fielded that question in customer service, like, why my back gets so sweaty? Why can't you just make a trampoline style backpack? Well, we don't know the production process for how that's developed, the equipment that's required to be able to make that happen. Like just the intricacies of some of those production processes that you look at, you're like, oh yeah, just take a piece of like stretchy fabric and put some binding on it and attach the four corners and you'll be good to go. Like, no, it's way, way more intense than that. But that's just
there's
the
equipment, there's frames
yeah.
you have to test, there's upfront costs to even, begin sampling it if you don't have the right equipment. There's all sorts of things. And then there's just design philosophy, right? Because I think that's the thing that people don't often get is everything's a trade-off, right? So if I do this, then I can't do this. And if I do this, then I can't do this. And so, because we'll get a similar question. And for us, it's not so much that we can't make it, test it, produce it. It's more, it goes against our design philosophy of like the best carrying backpack, the best load management backpack. We'll take that over a little, a few degrees, cooler back. I mean, if you're me, you're sweating anyways. Like my back may be a little bit less, a little bit more cooled off, but like I'm drenched in sweat no matter what, right? So there's always these pros and cons, because as soon as you start to push all of your load stuff, a few inches off of your back, then that means that you don't have the heaviest, most important items right next to your back, which is typically the best place for those in load carry management. But it's people, I think what probably made it not a stark contrast for you to step in and whatnot is because you were already trained to look at that well before you came into the industry, I'm sure. So It probably wasn't like whoa, now I get it. It was probably like, yep, that makes total sense. I understood that from before. But there's a lot of people, I guess, that just maybe don't think that way. But it's always a give and take with every single choice on any product.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to ask this question. You mentioned there that, you could be miles into a backpacking trip and you could have a gear piece fail on you, and what that would be like. You said it with a little bit of authority. So I'd love to hear like a scary story, like a time when you were out there and you're just, you had a situation unfold and you're just like, holy smokes, this is going on, and how, like what that was like. So yeah, story time. Let's hear it.
Okay. It's funny that this comes to mind like right off the bat, because I was not prepped with these questions ahead of time.
Yeah, that's Joe like makes me these prompts and then like I get done and then I'm like, oh yeah, there was some prompts there. I totally forgot to look at them. So we probably confuse like every guest that comes on the show.
No, it's cool. I like it. Okay. So towards the end of my college career or studies, whatever you want to call it, I was backpacking on a trip for a class that was called Outdoor Leadership. And I was in the field with a couple of my best friends in the program, and the professor and instructor for the class, she's amazing. She's just like one of the stand-up, like, she has an incredible resume of experience, having worked for like Knowles. This is important because like her field experience is so extensive that like she's so level-headed that you would think there's nothing that could happen to her that would like make her lose her cool and not be this like super professional type of individual that you're like, you're just so level-headed and professional all the time that you can't break that barrier from her. So we were on a 5-day backpacking trip in the Paria River down in southern Utah, northern Arizona. It's like 46 miles of hiking to get from the White House trailhead to Lee's Ferry, and it's phenomenal. If you ever have the chance.
It's so high on my list. It's got to get done soon.
Okay, let's put that as a checkbox for us to go do. That needs to happen. I'll look at permits for us.
Totally. I just drove past that and I was just like, when am I going to get back here? Like, I got to get down this section.
It's incredible. So the Paria River, and it's the first like 20 miles or so is really narrow. There's not a lot of high ground opportunities. Now, we didn't experience a flash flood necessarily, but the flow of the river was running significantly higher than you would probably like really want to choose to hike through the canyon at that time. So it was running at the time at 90 CFS, so cubic feet per second, which at some of the narrowest sections of the canyon, it's like 15 feet across. So it's pretty narrow. And to put that into perspective, 90 CFS was running at about knee deep to thigh deep anytime you were in the river. And so any higher than that, then you're risking like pretty scary situations.
Getting swept down.
Yeah, getting swept down, or just like you're wet all the time and the sun is not as present, especially at that time. It was March because spring break, it was March. It was cold. The flow of the river, like temperature wise, was like cold enough that you didn't want to be in it for a very long time. And there, on just the first day of hiking, you hike from the White House trailhead to the confluence of Buckskin Gulch, which Buckskin Gulch is the longest slot canyon. It's like over 12 miles. And there's a really excellent campsite about a quarter mile up from the confluence of Buckskin. But what we found ourselves having to navigate was, because the river was running so high, it's super muddy. You can't see through the water at all. And we realized that we were in this kind of like boulder jam kind of section. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's March. The sun has already like crossed the threshold of long gone. You're not going to see the sun anymore. And we were in a spot that we had to essentially take our packs off and wade up to about chest deep in water to get through this section.
Cold snow runoff water.
Super cold. And at the time we were like, no, this is fun. We get to take our packs off and like, this is cool. We get to go for like a little swim.
My back was sweaty anyways.
Yeah. But it was then like, I think that this is pretty common where you're in a situation where you're having a really good time and then like, boom, something happens and it completely changes what is taking place, where now you're like, no, I'm managing a completely different kind of situation now than I was 5 minutes ago. And I think it's like important from a risk management standpoint to like know that can happen at any time.
Fast.
So we get through the like really deep section. We've got our packs back on. And then one of the other students got close to the edge of the wall, and it just like, because you can't see where you're walking, there was a huge, where the current had like swept out all the sediment, and it was like chest deep. And this guy's like 6'4", like he's tall, and it's like up almost to his neck. And he had kind of like tripped and stuff. And then, well, I should go back. I don't think he was quite that deep. I don't want to over exaggerate because I might be getting a little detail mixed up there. It might have just been how deep it was on him going through the wading. But regardless, like got into a section that was really deep and like more than waist deep. And then the instructor, she tripped and fell, like straight up soaked in the water, and just now in a position of, I am soaking wet. And we make the turn at the confluence of Buckskin, and there is a ripping wind coming through the canyon, which it's now like, we're all soaking wet. The sun is gone. We're hungry. We're cold. Like, this is full on recipe for hypothermia situation. And I think that like, if it hadn't been for, well, let me back up. Once she fell in the water, her demeanor changed from like this, like, we just need to be smart about what we're doing, to like, oh crap, like this is not urgency. A good situation. And the urgency and like the level of patience, it wasn't like disrespectful, but it was just like, I am in a bad spot and I need all of you to basically like, you got to do what I say right now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so fortunately we were able to get camp set up. We were able to get out of our wet clothes, get into dry clothes, get some food in us. And the real risk of hypothermia wasn't as present as it could have been. But I think that is also just part of like having somebody that is so experienced in the field, and a group of people that also have a lot of field experience, to be like, okay, no, this is bad. Like, we have to change something now.
So you were able to get out of the river and into dry clothes? Like, were you able to kind of just stop where you were at and make a camp, or what?
Yeah. So we were able to like hike that 1/8 mile, 1/4 mile, or whatever it was, up to this like rise of a big sandy area that has a nice campsite that has some tree coverage to get out of the wind and be able to set up and get out of wet clothes.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, I mean, if you had still X amount of miles to go on the river or something like that, it gets a lot worse, right? Like, I'm just curious, what is your response in this kind of a scenario then? Say you did have to at least, be down there a little bit longer before you were able to, like let's say you're looking for an exit now out of this canyon, but there's not one right where you're at. What do? Do you just pick up the pace? Do you think that, like, my thought was like, maybe putting on a rain jacket, in the sense of like, like you're already wet on the inside, but maybe it could just hold that heat, or like the wind hitting you, you know what I mean? Like, keep that from getting, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, but like, what do you think some of the responses or options are in this kind of a scenario?
I think, and this is coming from, because I've gone through several wilderness first responder like training courses, that there has to be, especially in a group setting, there has to be a mental check. Like, checking in, okay, this is what's happening right now. Where are you at? Like, how are you feeling? Are you just like, I'm not okay and I need to stop? Or can we keep walking? Like, just checking in with yourself and your group members so that you can see where each other are at before you're just like go into problem solving mode and then trying to solve problems that aren't actually solutions and could be creating worse situations. So maybe it's based off of that mental check and seeing where everybody's at. You are then trying to find the closest place to camp, or you just set up for a couple hours and get out of wet clothes and you get into a sleeping bag on top of a tarp and you get yourself warmed up a bit. And that's the option, to be able to then put wet clothes back on and hike and to your next camp. Like, I think there's a lot of options, but just being smart to like not overreacting to what is happening, but making calculated decisions based off of what is actually happening, and then understanding the consequences or the potential risks that could come from the decisions that are made.
Yeah, I think you bring up probably the most valid concern, which is stopping and observing and checking in mentally, right? I know I've had it, but like I've experienced it where you start to get almost like a brain fog of rationale, or you get fixated on something in an intense situation where it's kind of like, this is the option, But then in retrospect, you're like, oh, there were other options. Or you'll have a moment where like, whoa, like just stop for a second and think and assess yourself before running into something. I mean, have you seen that a lot, or have you kind of experienced that firsthand with yourself or with students? I didn't mention this, but you're an educator, or you've taken a lot of new backpackers through different school courses out there. But I mean, have you seen that, or what do you have, I guess, to speak on in terms of kind of that process and knowing when to stop and check yourself mentally, or when to just be like, hey, like don't rush, slow down instead of go faster for just a second?
Yeah. So like a tool that I use, and my super close best friend that's also an instructor, he and I both teach backpacking at the university. He and I use a tool with our students that when we reach a certain point, if an event occurs, or if it's like late in the day and there's a couple options, we will have everybody close their eyes, and you either thumbs up or thumbs down. And if one person in the group gives a thumbs down, then you stop and make decisions based off of what is happening at that time. And the reason for like closing eyes is so that that person feels comfortable sharing that feeling. Because if you were to be like, there's 10 people here, and the one person that is like in agonizing pain and not enjoying themselves isn't going to speak up.
Right.
And then you can find yourself in even worse situations because of that.
I'm laughing. Yeah, I'm laughing because we do it probably the exact wrong way on some of our team trips. Like, I feel like it's peer pressure city out there to, stay hard, get after it, like,
I mean, this is also coming from the perspective of I've got students that have never carried a pack before.
Right.
So it could be their first time ever.
No one
backpacking.
on our team would not speak up. Like,
sure.
If people don't want to keep going, they're going to let us know. At least on my team, right? Especially in some of these bigger, more intense, or potentially, more risky hikes. But yeah, I'm just thinking back to like conversations we've had on the trail where it's like, there's probably a decent amount of like, you can do it. We can go far. Come on. Like, well, like just like pushing people. So, but no, I think that's a really valid way to do it. Especially with a group and especially with new people. I think that is really, really smart.
I mean, you show some of that, thought process stuff from like I know those videos of you hiking the High Line the first time when you were like stuck in those snowstorms. Mm-hmm. I don't remember what was being said, but there's like you and Tyler and Brigham trying to make decisions, right? And at some point, someone has to be the authority. Somebody has to say, okay, I've gathered all of the opinions. This is what we're actually going to do. And that's another thing, that even just going out with a group of friends, essentially defining like who's leading the group. Not that like there has to be a quote unquote group leader, but I think sometimes that falls on someone by default based off of who planned the trip, who knows the route, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because otherwise you have two things. You have two people planning, or else you have no one planning, right?
Oh, sure.
No one's defined.
Yeah.
Both are bad.
But even just like at the trailhead, having that quick discussion, like, okay, who's in charge? If we need to make decisions, who's going to be the final say?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. I think that's super healthy and a great way to approach good risk management and decision making in the backcountry. Yeah. And like, I think it's funny as well, because sometimes we'll talk about like these scary things that take place, and that when you go on a trip, you like have to have this mindset. I think it's just like understanding that risk management is a tool to have in your back pocket and is not like the guiding star necessarily of like, well, I'm going to go spend the weekend in the Uintas or wherever, and I got to make sure I have my risk management brain turned on. Like, no, it's just
Right.
just there as a
Right.
tool for when
Like,
it's needed to be part of that discussion.
yeah, and I think so. I want to try to like still pinpoint how to describe this, because it like you do things preparation wise to mitigate risk.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't think backpack is inherently dangerous, but it can be, if you're not at least going in wisely, I would say. And I also want to be careful with this too, because, my whole goal in doing anything that I do is to get more people outdoors and to experience the outdoors. So I'm not trying to scare anyone off here.
Yeah.
But I think there's things to be learned, valued here. And so I guess what I want to ask then is, has there ever been a trip where you've had to call the trip short, turn back, and you've kind of had to get to that point mentally where you're like, hey, I'm not in a good position, and you're able to stop, recognize that, kind of do that mental check and be like, you know what, I need to climb out of here, or I need to, like, what does that look like, and when do you get to that point where you are able to stop and check, right? Because if you can't trigger that, like, hey, I need to stop and check this before diving in deeper, then you can create, a mountain out of a molehill if it was mitigated right. So yeah, I'm curious if you ever had to like have that mental conversation, turn around on a trip, what that process is like for you.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, that recent, I joined a friend for like his annual birthday hike celebration up in the Uintas. And when I was recently on like a 4-day trip in the Sawtooth Mountains, I had kind of noticed this about my body as well. But the first day hiking in 2 weeks ago in the Uintas, I was like, man, I just feel fatigued. Like my body is just tired. And I noticed that, I mean, it wasn't like a crazy gain of elevation by any means. We're climbing up to like 10,500 feet up into the basin. But my heart rate, walking at about a 2.5 mile an hour pace, was at 170. Like,
Okay. So you're either dehydrated or something else is going on. Something not normal.
yeah. So I'm like, man, I'm walking at what should be a normal pace for me. And yeah, I have a heart murmur that's benign. And that's like part of something that I have to manage in my own body. But like, I should not be hitting 170, like even 175 at a gradual incline. Like something was just not right. So I kind of like thought, well, I haven't really hiked at elevation this year. It could just be my body is struggling with the elevation. We got to camp. We had hiked 9 miles to get to where we were at and ate dinner, and I felt like okay. And I went and had a fishing session and caught like 30 fish in 20 minutes. Like it was nuts. It was like one of the most like fun fishing experiences I've had on a backpacking trip ever.
That's awesome.
Climb in the tent, like I'm worn out. I go to sleep and I sleep terrible. Like I just did not get good sleep. And I'm like, well, that's to be expected. I'm on a new sleeping
Describe that
pad.
for a second, because there can be lessons, I feel like, in that. So when you say terrible sleep, what is that? Like, is it almost like you can't calm yourself down to fall asleep? Like,
No, like I was able to sleep, but I was waking up a lot.
okay.
And what I've been able to, and this is like getting nerdy with, I've got
Dude, I was just gonna, a
Garmin watch.
Yeah.
I don't know how scientific to take the sleep score and information that this watch like provides information wise.
Yeah.
But I do notice that when my watch says that I didn't get enough REM cycle, that equals terrible sleep. I may have slept long enough, but like my body didn't have a chance to recover, essentially.
Did you look at like your body's, God, what's that called? Body score? No.
The body battery?
Body battery. Yes.
Yeah.
I was just pulling it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was like at 13 or something when I went to bed, and it had only raised like 43 or 47 points. Like, so I think I had,
well, that's not like terrible. That's not uncommon, I should say. A lot of times when I go to altitude, if I'm not super careful, my body battery can get down to like 5 and like stay there for a couple days, or because I do the same thing. I track with the watch pretty heavily to see like my resting heart rate. I found that's a big indicator. So like when I was asking you about sleep, for me, a lot of times my heart will like get high and stay high. And so then I can't fall asleep if my resting heart rate is like 80 beats per minute, when at home it's 45 when I'm sleeping. And so there is some real value to just knowing your heart rate. Like it's pretty wild. So, okay. So bad night of sleep, tossing and turning, not getting into the full cycles of sleep.
Yeah. And then when I got up and started moving around, it was like, okay, like I've had several nights of bad sleep like that before. This isn't a big deal. Like I'll just wake up and get moving and get some breakfast in me, and I'll start to feel better. So then I like make some breakfast, and I'm like, man, I just really like, it's not changing. And I'm not feeling so bad that I'm like, yeah, I should go back to the car. But it was just like, I couldn't pinpoint exactly what I was feeling. My body just did not feel good. I didn't have cold symptoms. I didn't have a runny nose. I didn't have a headache. I didn't have nausea or like standard elevation, like acute mountain sickness type of symptoms. Yeah. So I'm like, can it really be the elevation? And like, I just couldn't pin down what it was. And I thought to myself for like 5 minutes, I'm like, would I be better off going back to the car? Because the plan for the day was to climb up over a pass at like 11,500 feet, and then go down into another basin, and then go up to a lake that's like 10 miles from the car. And then the next day we would hike 10 miles from the lake to the car. And I'm like trying to just process, do I hike 9 miles today that's all downhill and just call it early and know that I'll feel good enough to make that happen? Or do I create some other plan? So I told my friend, I was like, I don't feel good. I don't know like what to pin it to, but like, I think I should walk back to the car. And what I was concerned about with that is I didn't want to ruin his plans. Yeah. And I think that's a real thing, that you're worried about like upsetting somebody else or ruining their plans or whatever. And so we talked about it for a bit, and we agreed that we would climb up over the pass, take our time, and then go down and walk closer to the car and just have a shorter hike out for the next day. Well, that didn't even happen. Like we did do up over the pass and went down, and that whole time I'm just like, man, I am not enjoying myself. I'm not having a good time. It's beautiful, and like moments of this is fun, but in reality, it was like my body hurts. Like I just don't feel good. I don't really want to be doing this anymore. And so when we got to the point that we decided we're going to start looking for camp right here, it would be like 4 miles from the car. And at that time it was like 6:30 p.m. So it had taken us most of the day to get up over the pass and down to that point. And then my friend realized that over a river crossing, or where we had crossed the river, he had dropped his phone. Like it wasn't on his body anymore. And it's just like, oh my gosh. So we like hiked back to where we think it happened, ended up finding the phone, which is super nice, but that took like 45 minutes. And at this time it was like past 7 o'clock. And we just looked at each other like, because of how much condensation there was last night, all of our sleep gear was wet, the sun was already down, and we were like, we're just going to walk back to the car. So we walked the 4 miles back to the car and did 13 miles that day, or 14 miles.
Yeah.
So,
and when you, I mean, so what, like when you get back and you look back at all that, I don't know, like, is it just like, you don't know what was wrong still with what was going on with you? And
yeah, like I felt a lot of regret, and I felt bad for making that trip not as enjoyable as it could have been for my friend, because he didn't get to like check off some of the boxes that he had wanted to do on his checklist for his birthday. But when I got home, even like 2 days later, I was like, God, I don't feel good. And starting to feel better. Like I feel better now, but I don't know, maybe it was
so strange. So what was there a moment where you just really realized, like, because that's actually an interesting one, because a lot of times like you get into like really sticky situations where it's like, okay, I need to stop, right? Like, I don't know, I have a video out there, it's called like 41 below freezing, and I get to a point where I'm like scrambling to get my camp set up, the wind is blowing and it's below 0 degrees, and I realized that like I was so focused on what I was doing that I hadn't even put my jacket on, and I was like freezing. I was getting really cold. You know what I mean? It's just like just mental fog, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's like one of those like, oh well, duh. Like take a second to assess the situation, put your jacket on, and feel better. But like this one's kind of a sneaky one, right? So like, was there was there just that moment where you're like, where it was very clear to you that something wasn't right and this could get worse?
What I was concerned about was going up higher in elevation and being at like on a pass, scrambling over boulder fields, and my body not being in the right state physically to be able to navigate through that stuff appropriately, and then leading to like an injury, losing my balance and rolling down the pass, or because this pass doesn't have a trail going up it. It's like a full on scramble, like hands, all fours, like
Yeah.
And so I think if there was more symptoms of something that was presenting as an actual like elevation sickness, or I am sick with something else, that would have been a like key indicator of, no, I'm not going to continue. And it's better for me to just call it kind of situation. But there was just like, I'm just really tired. Like my body is just fatigued. And if I can keep calories in me and I can get up over the pass and then we're just downhill at that point, that's where I felt confident enough to continue.
Right.
But I think you have to recognize when something is not going right, to go ahead and start considering what the options are and not let something get too far. And that can be hard. Like you have like maybe a super introverted person that has a hard time speaking up when they're in a group setting, or even when you're solo and you're like, no, I like summit fever, right? Like I'm going to do this. I'm going to prove my point to myself. And then you're like,
Yeah.
crap, I went too far.
Yeah. I I can resonate with that for sure. It's interesting. I mean, it's tough. And so we run the 100-mile challenge group, and I was just reading through a bunch of those entries pretty recently. And a lot of people are newer to backpacking, or this is for sure like their biggest trip that they're planning, their biggest adventure. And it's very interesting. I mean, I don't know percentage wise how many, but I feel like it was like half of the people had to alter their plans, right? Like half had to alter their plans. Like we couldn't make the mileage we were planning, or there was a fire that happened, or there was one of the group members, something happened, or I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. And that's not different from the year prior either. So that's kind of 2 years of data like that. And so I think anytime you're setting out to do something brand new to you, meaning like a new trail or maybe people are traveling across the country to hike in the West versus the East, or anytime that there's, you're just pushing boundaries that you haven't pushed before, I think there is a high probability of needing a plan B or a plan C. And so I think, yeah, like sometimes you can think of those beforehand and have those already planned. And that's something that we do coach people to do. But, just like you're saying too, like just rolling those around your head earlier is sometimes better, because a lot of times when you delay making a choice, you make the choice worse, the options worse, right? Farther down the road. So
yeah,
it's really interesting.
I think there's two points of like personal check-in opportunities when you're on the trail and like I like to use these because it doesn't matter what your experience level is. It's a good opportunity to see where you're at. The first is when you stop for lunch, just have a check-in with yourself, but also with the group that you're with. Like, how's everybody feeling? Take your shoes off, check your feet, like check for blisters, like all of that. And just like, how do I actually feel right now? Do I need to eat more and get more calories in me to be able to make it to camp and not feel like I'm totally worn out? Because there's this idea that like around 4 o'clock is where the umbles start. You start to mumble and stumble and like, because you're hungry, you're tired, like you've been on the trail all day, you haven't had enough calories because you ate lunch and you think, oh, I'm going to just be good for the next 5 hours, when no, actually you still need like 400 calories to get yourself to dinner. And that's like where accidents happen, because you're at elevation, you're fatigued, and you start to stumble and just can find yourself in a bad spot. So lunchtime, I think, is a good check-in moment. Second is when you go to the bathroom, which sounds silly, but like you can learn a lot about what your body is doing based off of what your pee looks like. And it's a really, really good check-in moment to be like, oh, my pee smells really bad, or it's very dark. Like I need
or
to
if you're
stop.
in the middle of an ultra marathon, it hurts to pee. Why does it hurt?
Yeah. In that case, find an ambulance and get to the ER. But I think people overlook that they're like, oh yeah, I went to the bathroom and it's whatever, I just had to pee. But it's like, no, if your pee smells or is dark in color, then you're already behind where you should be. Your body, like you should stop, hydrate, get some sodium in your body, get those electrolytes going. Like I think those are really smart, good ways to check in with yourself on the trail.
Yeah, I think those are great. And I think that also anyone listening to this, don't be ashamed of asking those questions, especially if you're out with new people. I know that for me, I'm always taking newer people out, or I'm kind of feeling like I'm the trip lead in some ways, or I'm at least liable. Right. And so, I have to ask that sometimes, like, you guys all peed in like the last 3 hours, just stuff like that, just to make sure, do some of those check-ins. And anytime I'm taking someone new to elevation, I'm like, just a mother hen. I'm just like pestering the crap out of them in some ways, but it's proven to be very helpful, and you can avoid disaster or massive reroutes or all sorts of things by that. So I think those are great. A lunchtime check-in, and then a check-in every time you're stopping, or a lack thereof, is also a very big indicator. So okay, I want to ask you a few questions about just some gear, and then I want to be respectful of your time too. I know you've been doing some awesome videos. You've been doing some stuff up in the Sawtooths, which I'd love to talk more about, but we may not be able to get to all of that. So I want to ask you some different questions. You cover a lot of ultralight gear. You cover a lot of just lightweight backpacking gear. But I also know you're someone who takes your family out a lot. Mm-hmm. You've got some little girls you're taking out, and a little boy, right? But I don't know how much he's come out. Yeah. But I'd love to hear, like, what are your car camping favorites? It's been something that's just kind of been on my mind recently. But like, I should really get like a car camping setup. I mean, here at Outdoor Vitals, we make a ton of gear, but most of it is ultralight backpacking, performance backpacking focused. And so I was just out backpacking with my kids, and I'm like, you know what? I think I want a 2-person sleeping pad, because what happens is I'm in the middle and my 2 kids are snuggled up like right here on me. And I'm just like, I'm in the crack and I hate this crack. You know what I mean? Like, so they're just still so small. Like, they don't really stay on their own pads, right? They can migrate to me. And so, I would just love to hear maybe some of your favorite car camping things, pieces of gear for this year.
Okay. I'll give you what, like, top 5 things come to mind off the bat. The first is the tent that we love to use as a family. It's
really been looking at that one.
Yeah, I
think I know what you're going to say.
The Nemo Aurora High Rise 6-person. I love it because it is not so big that you can't really find places to put it, but it's got room to stand up. It fits me, my wife, my 3 kids, and my dog all in the tent.
Okay.
And then it's got like vertical walls.
How does it do in weather, or have you had it in weather?
It's done really well in the rain because it has such a high profile. It's not the best for wind resistance, but it does well enough.
Could you attach additional guy lines and get proper stakes to have it perform okay in the wind, or would you recommend just a different tent for that?
No, it'll do well enough. Like each of the four sides, the corners have guy lines.
Okay.
And then, like, the nice thing is the vestibules stake out at 2 points instead of like coming down at a straight V. To only have 1 stakeout point. So there's enough stakes in the ground that it holds itself really good.
Yeah. I think that may be on my list to acquire. I've recently been using like a Seek Outside Red Cliff, so like a TP style, because I can backpack with it still. And then I have a nest for like one side, but my kids, like the space. But yeah, that Nemo High Rise is on the list. All right, what's number 2?
It's so good. Okay, number 2 is the sleep system. So it's two items: the XPED Megamat Duo for my wife and I to sleep on, with the Zenbivy double bed system.
Yeah,
it's dude, it is so nice. That sleeping pad is super warm, so you don't have to worry about like ever sleeping cold on it. It's very comfortable. The only downside is it's pretty bulky. Like, it's a large.
I was going to say, is that one that could be backpacked, or is it really a car camp?
No, it's like It's as big as a 40-liter pack when it's rolled up.
Okay. Got
It's
it.
got some beef
Do
to
you
it.
do you have a recommendation if I did want one that I could like heavily backpack with?
That's a
Like meaning
double.
like a heavier setup that's a double. Like I haven't. I was looking at Xpeds. I browsed around just a little bit. And I wasn't super. Some of them were only 40 inches wide, and I was like, man, if I'm
Yeah.
getting a double, like I wanted to be 50. And there was an XPED one that looked okay that I was looking at, but
Yeah, I think the Nemo Quasar
yeah,
3D is wide. I think it's like 48 inches wide
yeah.
for the double
They didn't
size.
have it on their website. I couldn't believe it. There was no dimension on that product on their website. I was like, how do you
Oh,
miss
for real?
having the size of a pad? Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
because I know you've liked the Quasar single, right? I
Uh-huh.
think you say it's a very comfortable pad.
Yeah, I haven't used the double, so I
Okay.
can't speak to the
Yeah.
experience with that, but you could easily backpack with that. Or well, actually, no, that wouldn't work because it's only 40 inches. So I think
Okay. Those are two good
the
options, though.
yeah. So, but that Zenbivy like duo double
Hmm.
bed is so good, and you can backpack with it. Like it's light
Yeah.
enough, compresses small enough that we've backpacked with it. No zippers. It is super warm. It's plenty wide for two people. It's a great sleep system.
Awesome.
Really, really enjoy that.
Yeah. It looks
Okay.
very much like you say, like your bed at home, which is always going to be especially if you're taking, people out that aren't used to sleeping in bags at all, like that's going to be
Uh-huh.
very approachable.
Yeah, just that idea of like pulling a comforter up around your neck and being able to feel like you're in a bed
Totally.
and not in a sleeping bag. So the fourth item is kind of random, but I have enjoyed them so much. It's kind of ridiculous. But there are these storage crates
Oh, yes. I've seen you
to
talk about them.
organize my gear. And I have zero affiliation with them. I just like saw them on a Facebook ad that just like kept showing up on my feed. And
You clicked it once, you're done. Yeah, you're
I'm
going to
like,
get it forever.
these are actually really cool. So the company is Sidio. I think it's like SIDIO. And they make
Okay.
these made in USA plastic, like super heavy duty crates. But what makes them cool is they've got a really nice lid system, but then they have like 60 slots that run across the entire length of the crate. You can put dividers in to organize all of your stuff. And as opposed to like for so long we used just like a clear plastic hefty like Tupperware bin, and it's great when you've got everything in there and it's all nice and organized, but when you start pulling stuff out it just like falls into different places and it becomes a huge mess and it's not organized, and it like is not a great system. So that has genuinely been a game changer in our car camping to have. I just have two of them. I have a crate that's all of my kitchen stuff and a crate that is all of like the loose end miscellaneous, like uh, flashlights and bug repellent stuff and uh, all the random small things that need a home. Those
Yeah.
are those are fantastic.
I saw your review on these and I thought it looked really cool. I got looking at them and they were a little expensive. And so I think I had a question. I'm like, are these really worth it, Devin? Should I
I
really,
know, I know.
but
Yes, they
I'm like
they're
in it.
so worth
I
it.
need to go through a lot of my gear and dumb down a lot of it. I've got a lot of like, so what I do is I've got clear plastic containers just like in my gear room. And I've just got to go through it and pare it down because I'm like a self-proclaimed minimalist but I choose where I'm a minimalist. And so I'm realizing like there's so many areas that I need to apply more and more of this. And it just happens over time, right? Like if you don't consciously go back through and pare stuff down. But Yeah, maybe I think those are really cool. I saw you talk about those on a video, and I thought, man, those are really cool. And then I just didn't actually pick them up yet, so I'll have to.
Yeah, I think it was like $100 for the kit for two of them, which
Yeah,
I'll admit it's a lot of money, but
but
they're like
they're durable. They're gonna last.
yeah, that
Okay.
they're
Okay.
amazing. We'll just say that
Because I think
okay.
that was like one of the biggest things is like some of the containers I have, right? Like you buy them from Walmart or Home Depot, like just like the plastic containers. Like I've cracked tons of lids, I've broken components on them. You know what I mean? So if they're a more durable piece, I'm happy to do it if I know it's going to be a piece that will last a long time.
Yeah, I've had them for a year, and no, over a year, and there's like no sign of any cracks or anything broken, or like
Yeah,
they still look like the day I bought them.
they're not
So
not
and
flimsy.
they get used a lot. They get used a lot. Okay, so the next one, I got a new 2 burner stove this year. That's from Primus. It's called like
Okay.
the Kinja, uh, something like that.
Mhm.
KINJIA, I think. I don't know, something like that. But it is one of the best camping stoves I have ever used. And it's like so simple. Like a 2 burner stove is not this like, I don't at this point, I don't think you can
Yeah,
be
I'm looking at it here. I'm
super,
like, what's the deal, Devin?
you can't be like super innovative with it. I think GSI did a really good job with their Pinnacle Pro, being super like low profile and such. And that stove is incredible. But this Primus stove, it's nice because it's pretty small in size, but because you don't have those wings on the sides that you have to like put up, that I guess are a windscreen,
Yeah.
but because you don't have those, you're not limited to the size of pot and griddle that you can put on it. But the Primus burners are also really nice.
Yeah.
They have really nice simmer control, so you can actually cook on them, and they'll burn at like freaking jets and boil water super fast.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've enjoyed cooking on that so much. It's high quality, and I'm expected to last for years and years and years. Easy to clean. Yeah, it's a great stove.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. Well, that's a great car camping list. And I think we're at time. So I'm going to give you
Okay.
one chance to list any other gear that you want to list or say anything else that you want to say here, Devin. This has been awesome.
I don't know. I just like, life is interesting right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've
I
never been in a position where like I take a leap of faith, because we didn't really talk about like now
Yeah,
I'm like
you're
full-time
full-time YouTube
YouTube.
now. Yes, yes.
Um, and it is so bizarre to be like, well, I can go camping or I can go backpacking in the middle of the week. Like my schedule is my own. It's so weird. Um, but I will say that like anybody watching that has spent any time watching my videos over the last 10 years, I just want to say thank you. Like, thanks for watching, commenting, supporting what I do, and like being part of the process and the story. Like, it's just really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been such a cool journey to watch, and if anyone listening to this wants just very sound, very level-headed, practical gear advice, you're going to find it on Devin's channel. You're going to find more content lately because, like you said, you've made that jump. You're attacking YouTube full time, and you've been hustling and getting lots of great content out there. So it's definitely a channel worth following. He does a great job of balancing performance, technical specs, and then real world like application, right? Because a lot of times, you can watch even my own stuff or other people's stuff out there. And it's like, oh, you got to get the weights down. You got to do this. But in reality, like not many of you guys are doing 20-mile days or more. A lot of it, you guys out there are doing solid 10-mile days, and you're enjoying the trip in a different way, in the sense of like, you can bring a chair, you can bring a heavier sleeping pad for more comfort. You could bring, preferences and I think, you do a great job of like, you do ultralight setups, and then you're like, this is my luxury setup. And it's still really lightweight and backpackable, but so there's just a lot of great content, I think, for everyone to go check out on Devin's channel. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Appreciate the time we've been able to share on trail. I hope we can get back out on trail in the near future, especially now that your time's a little bit more freed up. And we'll see. My falls are crazy, but I hope that we can find a time here in the next month or two to get on trail together and spend some more time. So
yeah. Sounds great.
Okay,
man.
well, go follow Devin, Backcountry Exposure on YouTube, and I believe it's the same on Instagram. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep.
And with that, thanks again so much for coming on the show, Devin.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. I always have a great time talking with Devin. Again, he's just a phenomenal person and a phenomenal wealth of knowledge. So I hope you guys will jump over to his channel, subscribe, and I'm sure somewhere down the line we'll bring him back on. So if you guys have any questions or comments for him, let us know. I'm sure in another year we'll have him back on. So if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you're following us. Please share this episode if you found value in it. And if you've not yet done so, please rate and review this podcast. That helps us with our mission of helping more people get outdoors and disconnect from this crazy world we live in and reconnect with themselves or family relationships or friendships. So really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys on a future episode.